Hello, this is Bill Bullard with RCAF USA, the voice of the independent cattle producer in the United States of America. Well, in meetings co-sponsored last week by the South Dakota Stockgrowers Association and the Independent Beef Association of North Dakota, known as IBAND, RCAF USA presented hour-long talks in Lemon and Mobridge, South Dakota, and in Mandan, North Dakota. A total of about 500 area cattle producers attended these meetings, and it was clear that they are concerned for the future of their industry. The title of RCAF USA's presentation was Why America is Losing Its Ranches. So everyone knows that the cattle have the longest biological cycle of any farmed animal. It takes 18 to 24 months before a calf born today will be ready for harvest. And it takes about 3 years for the industry to respond to changes in the demand or price for cattle. That means the 36 million calves born this year will be working their way through the live cattle supply chain for the next 2 years, regardless of what happens to cattle prices or beef demand. So this inability to respond quickly to changes in price or demand makes the cattle industry, and particularly the independent producers within the industry, highly susceptible to price volatility. And after the August 9th fire at the Tyson plant in Holcomb, Kansas, fed cattle prices dropped to less than $100, and they remain at this terrible low level today. The last time fed cattle prices fell to such low levels was 3 years ago in October 2016, and the last time before that was 9 years ago in November 2010. Unfortunately for our industry, the way we respond to drastically low prices is to liquidate, and that means we liquidate both cattle and cattle producers. That's why so many cattle producers have exited the industry during the past 25 years, and why our herd size is now 7 million head short of what it was just 25 years ago. If we look at the cattle industry's cattle cycle, that once tracked our industry's responses to low prices, which caused our industry to liquidate, and higher prices that causes our industry to rebuild, we see that our cattle cycle has been seriously disrupted since the early 1980s. Our industry liquidated about 6.5 million cows in response to depressed prices in the 80s. And while the liquidation phase of our industry typically lasted only 3 to 4 years, we witnessed an unprecedented 8-year liquidation phase at that time. Our industry then began rebuilding in the early 90s, but the recovery was snail-paced slow. Then the meatpacking lobby came up with a plan, and they convinced the president at the time and the majority of Congress to enter a free trade agreement with Canada and Mexico. The promise was that by having free trade with Canada and Mexico, the U.S. cattle industry would have a much bigger market in which to sell beef. What wasn't considered at the time was that Canada and Mexico were overproducing both cattle and beef, and the potential impact to our industry should we see far more imports than exports also was completely ignored. Instead, the rallying cry that brought the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, into existence in 1994 was that it would expand marketing opportunities for the U.S. cattle industry, and the U.S. cattle industry would grow and prosper. The meatpacking lobby and Congress and the president could not have been more wrong. Beginning just 2 years after NAFTA, in 1996, the U.S. cattle industry began a record-breaking liquidation phase. From 96 through 2014, our cattle industry liquidated another 6 million cattle and nearly 200,000 U.S. cattle farmers and ranchers. That unprecedented liquidation lasted 17 years. And then when the dust settled, our cow herd was the smallest level it had been in over 7 decades. The NAFTA agreement had accomplished exactly the opposite of what was promised. And now the newly renegotiated NAFTA, called the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, contains the same exact failed provisions as did NAFTA. There are no changes whatsoever in the USMCA in the trade of cattle and beef. This is a disaster for our industry. When our industry began responding to higher prices in 2014 by finally beginning to rebuild our herd, both current and aspiring farmers and ranchers expected higher prices to last for 6 to 7 years, which was the case of our cattle cycle before it became dysfunctional in the 80s. Many young ranchers bought cows to start operations at this time, but the market crashed the very next year, in 2015, and that crash was absolutely obliterated economic opportunities for many current and aspiring ranchers. The important point to be made here is that the organization that you think is best representing your interests needs your financial support so they can put our industry back on track. Don't sit on the sidelines during these tumultuous times. You can go to www.r-calfusa.com if you'd like to support what we're doing for your industry. With that, we're out of time. We hope you have a productive week. Thank you and goodbye.